Stop right there. You think your dad's a hero? Ha ha ha. Officer Parker's voice boomed across the sunlit basketball court, echoing off the red brick walls of Clearview High School, catching the scattered groups of students mid-laugh and mid-step, turning heads with an almost tangible ripple of tension. Jamal Thompson froze in place, hoodie hood slightly pulled back to reveal a calm, determined gaze, his fingers lightly clutching the strap of his worn canvas backpack, as if grounding himself in the reality that the mocking voice belonged to a man towering above him. Uniform crisp, badge gleaming under the morning sun, eyes narrowing with a mix of disbelief and superiority. Around them, the chatter of students dimmed into a curious hum, sneakers squeaking against the painted concrete lines of the court, the chain-link fence vibrating subtly with the shouts of distant teammates warming up for practice, the late September air carrying the sharp scent of freshly cut grass and the faint tang of fall leaves. Parker's lips curled into a smirk, white teeth flashing against the tanned skin, and he leaned slightly forward, the metal belt buckle catching sunlight, the heavy leather of his holster pressing against his hip, a silent statement of authority, a visual cue that this wasn't a place for debate, that this was a stage of hierarchy where he set the rules and the audience, the students, the teachers peeking from classrooms, the lunch monitors, was already casting judgment. Jamal exhaled slowly, shoulders back, feet planted firmly on the asphalt, the rhythmic beat of a distant basketball bouncing off the walls syncing almost perfectly with the subtle racing of his heartbeat, the hoodie brushing against his forearms as he lifted his chin, meeting Parker's gaze with an unwavering calm that seemed almost to bend the space between them, a quiet defiance that spoke louder than words. He could feel the eyes of classmates flicking between them, sensing the imbalance, sensing the stakes without fully knowing what they were, and yet Jamal stood as a silent emblem of confidence, a contrast to Parker's theatrical mockery. The officer's chuckle rolled across the court like distant thunder, exaggerated, condescending, echoing in the spaces between the lockers and the bleachers, and Jamal's eyes tracked the subtle movements of the students stepping back, creating a widening circle that emphasized the gravity of this small, yet significant, confrontation. The late morning sun cast shadows that stretched across the painted lines, highlighting the tense gap between authority and youth, between mockery and quiet resolve, the leaves rustling above seeming almost a whisper in anticipation of what might come next, as Jamal shifted his weight just slightly, the sound of his shoes scuffing against the painted asphalt registering in the still air, a counterpoint to the loud, theatrical voice of the cop, a metronome of patience and inner strength. Every muscle in Parker's frame seemed poised to assert dominance, but Jamal's steady stance, the subtle tilt of his head, and the unwavering focus in his brown eyes created an invisible boundary, an unspoken challenge that even the seasoned officer could feel pressing against him, a collision of pride and principle that held the entire court in suspended attention, the breeze catching the loose threads of Jamal's hoodie, fluttering almost imperceptibly against his skin, a gentle movement amidst the rigidity of tension, a reminder that the quiet can be more commanding than the loud, and that presence, measured and deliberate, can speak volumes before a single syllable is uttered. Jamal Thompson shifted his weight slightly, feeling the slight roughness of the asphalt beneath his sneakers as the morning sun warmed the edges of the basketball court, the scent of freshly mown grass mingling with the crisp air of early fall. His brown eyes scanned the faces around him, noting the mixture of curiosity and amusement, the slight hesitations in the students who had formed a semicircle around the unfolding scene, some whispering to each other, others holding their breath in anticipation of what would come next. Jamal adjusted the strap of his backpack, the canvas rough against his shoulder, grounding himself in a rhythm that had been cultivated through years of navigating new schools, new classrooms, new groups of peers who often misjudged him at first glance. His hoodie, a muted gray with frayed cuffs, moved softly against his arms as he raised his head and allowed his gaze to sweep across the expanse of the schoolyard, from the rows of lockers lining the walls to the bleachers where a few students sat, feet dangling, observing quietly, the metallic clatter of basketballs from a distant court punctuating the quiet murmur of voices. Jamal had transferred to Clearview High School earlier that week, and though he had become accustomed to the unease that came with being the new student, He had learned to carry himself with a steady confidence, the type that did not rely on the approval of others, but instead drew strength from the clarity of his own mind and the knowledge of who he was. His father, Michael Thompson, had always instilled in him the importance of integrity and calm, teaching him that presence and patience often spoke louder than words, and that one could command respect without raising a voice or displaying unnecessary bravado. As Jamal shifted slightly on the balls of his feet, he felt the soft wind brush against his face, carrying the subtle, earthy scent of fallen leaves and the faint aroma of coffee from the school cafeteria a few hundred feet away. His ears picked up the slight creaks of the chain-link fence swaying in the morning breeze and the distant hum of traffic on the street outside the school, anchoring him to the tangible, real world, a counterbalance to the internal surge of anticipation he felt. Every movement of his classmates, from the tilt of a head to the subtle shifting of weight, registered in his awareness, the collective energy around him amplifying the significance of the moment without words being spoken. Jamal's posture remained upright, shoulders back, chin slightly raised, a quiet demonstration of the resilience and composure that had carried him through previous encounters with skepticism and mockery, whether from peers, teachers, or strangers who underestimated him. He allowed his mind to settle on the small, controlled sensations, the texture of the asphalt beneath his shoes, the weight of the backpack strap on his shoulder, the rhythm of his own breathing, slow and steady, each inhale and exhale reinforcing his presence in the moment. Around him, the sunlight reflected off windows and metal surfaces, creating small patterns of light and shadow that danced across the court and added a cinematic quality to the scene, highlighting the tension and anticipation in a way that seemed almost choreographed, yet entirely natural. Jamal's gaze returned briefly to Officer Parker, observing the subtle flickers of expression, the slight tightening of the jaw, the narrowing of eyes, a mixture of incredulity and disbelief that mirrored the ripple of attention from the students gathered nearby. In that silence, punctuated by the distant thud of a basketball and the rustle of leaves, Jamal found a strange clarity, a recognition that despite the mockery and the smirks, the moment belonged to him to navigate with poise and confidence, drawing from the quiet lessons of his father and the steady accumulation of experiences that had prepared him to stand unwavering in the face of authority and skepticism alike. He shifted again, just enough to feel the balance in his stance, the subtle grounding of his sneakers on the painted lines of the court, feeling both the weight of expectation and the calm of self-possession intertwining, a demonstration of readiness not for confrontation, but for the measured, deliberate response that would soon unfold. Officer Parker shifted his weight slightly, his polished black shoes squeaking softly against the painted asphalt as he took a deliberate step closer, his crisp uniform catching the morning sunlight, the metallic badge glinting sharply and the polished leather of his belt reflecting the faint shimmer from the bleachers beyond. His eyes scanned Jamal Thompson with a mixture of incredulity and condescension, eyebrows raised, lips curling into a smirk that seemed practiced from years of asserting authority over those he deemed beneath him, while the students around them held their breath, caught between curiosity and the unspoken rules of observing without interfering. The basketball court, expansive and lined with the faded white markings of multiple games, seemed to contract under the weight of attention, shadows stretching in the early autumn light, the gentle sway of the chain-link fence creating a subtle backdrop that framed the standoff in a cinematic clarity, every leaf and ripple of movement accentuating the tension. Jamal adjusted the hood of his gray sweatshirt, the frayed edges brushing against his forearms as he took in a slow breath, grounding himself in the measured cadence his father had taught him, the awareness of every detail, the distant hum of the air conditioning units on the school roof, the muted chatter from the cafeteria across the quad, the faint creak of a metal locker swinging gently in the breeze, feeding into a sense of heightened perception that sharpened his focus. Parker's gaze flicked toward the crowd of students, noting the subtle glances, the whispers, the tentative steps of those edging slightly back, creating a widening circle that amplified the spotlight on the moment, and yet Jamal remained centered, unshaken, the quiet authority of presence radiating from his posture, his shoulders squared, chin lifted slightly, eyes steady and unwavering. The sunlight reflected off the brickwork and bleachers, casting patterns of light and shadow across Parker's uniform and the surrounding students. The effect almost painterly in its clarity, emphasizing the contrast between the imposing officer and the calm, composed figure of Jamal. Every movement Parker made, from the shifting of his hands to the subtle adjustment of his belt, seemed to project an expectation of submission. Yet Jamal's measured stillness countered that, creating a tension that vibrated through the air, felt by every student within the makeshift amphitheater of the court. Jamal's backpack shifted slightly as he adjusted his grip, the weight of textbooks and personal items grounding him physically even as the emotional weight of the confrontation hovered above every sound, from the distant thud of a bouncing basketball to the soft scrape of shoes against concrete, magnifying the sense of suspended anticipation. His eyes, deep and attentive, followed the subtle changes in Parker's expression, noting the flickers of doubt behind the smirk, the quick glances that betrayed a recognition that the encounter was not proceeding as expected, a silent acknowledgement that control was not absolute, and that Jamal's quiet confidence was reshaping the perception of authority in real time. The autumn breeze stirred the edges of Jamal's hoodie, lifting strands of his hair gently, the faint rustle harmonizing with the soft, irregular echoes of footsteps and voices, creating a layered soundscape that reinforced the immersive immediacy of the moment, each element contributing to the cinematic tension, the kind that holds attention and sharpens the senses, drawing the observer into a shared anticipation of what was to come next, every detail purposeful, every subtle motion charged with significance. And through it all, Jamal remained a beacon of measured composure, the embodiment of patience, integrity, and a quiet, compelling presence that challenged the assumptions of those around him without a single word of defiance spoken. Jamal Thompson took a deep, steadying breath, letting the crisp morning air fill his lungs as his gaze remained locked on Officer Parker, the sunlight glinting off the officer's badge, casting a small, reflective glow that danced across the painted asphalt of the basketball court. Around them, the subtle noises of a high school morning continued, lockers clanging gently in the hallways nearby, a distant basketball thumping against the court, students' voices whispering in clusters. But Jamal's focus filtered out the distractions, narrowing to the immediate space between himself and the imposing figure in front of him. He shifted his weight slightly, feeling the rough texture of the asphalt under his sneakers, the slight give of the painted lines beneath, a grounding sensation that kept him present and deliberate in his stance. The gray hoodie he wore, frayed at the cuffs, moved gently with his subtle shifts, brushing lightly against his forearms as he maintained an upright, calm posture, shoulders squared and chin slightly lifted, a composed presence that contrasted with Parker's rigid, taut frame. Parker's eyes flicked over the crowd, noting the half-hidden expressions of amusement, curiosity, and tension on the faces of students gathered in a loose circle, their attention drawn to the unfolding moment, each individual responding to the silent power play without fully realizing it. The breeze rustled leaves in the nearby trees, the faint aroma of fresh grass and faint autumn chill mingling to create a tangible atmosphere that seemed to heighten the focus on the standoff. Jamal's fingers rested lightly on the strap of his backpack, a subtle reminder of his grounding, of the lessons learned from his father about patience, integrity, and quiet confidence. He allowed his eyes to sweep the perimeter of the court, noting the students' shifting feet and the slight movements of teachers observing from nearby windows, the scene rich with layered tension that hung between anticipation and respect, a moment where presence and quiet assertion spoke louder than words. As Parker shifted slightly, the sunlight caught the edges of his uniform and belt, emphasizing his authority and the expectation of deference. Yet Jamal remained centered, the careful control in his posture, the measured tilt of his head, and the calm, steady gaze signaling an inner strength that drew the attention of everyone around. The distant hum of the school air conditioning units, the faint squeak of sneakers on asphalt, the soft murmur of whispers, all underscored the silent exchange of tension and composure. Jamal's eyes returned to Parker, noting subtle micro-expressions, the twitch of a jaw, the slight narrowing of eyes, the barely perceptible shift in weight, all indicators of the officer's challenge to authority being met with unexpected resilience. Each student's breath seemed to pause, the ambient sounds folding into a tense quiet that magnified the presence of the two central figures. Parker with his conventional display of power and Jamal with his calm, unwavering defiance. The sunlight, shadows, and subtle environmental cues weaving together a scene rich with unspoken narrative and cinematic clarity. The type of focused stillness that commands attention and sets the stage for the next unfolding moment. Officer Parker's smirk deepened for a moment, a nervous energy flickering in his eyes as he leaned slightly forward, his polished shoes pressing against the painted court, the sunlight reflecting off his badge in sharp, almost dazzling glints. Jamal Thompson remained motionless, the gray hoodie settling softly around his shoulders as his hands lightly gripped the straps of his backpack, each movement deliberate, steady, unhurried, as if he were drawing invisible lines of calm and authority around himself. The students circling the scene shifted subtly, their murmurs rising and falling like the rhythm of a distant heartbeat, the faint metallic clatter of the nearby chain-link fence echoing under the weight of expectation, the soft creak of lockers and occasional distant shouts creating a layered auditory backdrop that emphasized the tension in the moment. Parker's voice carried across the court again, a mixture of disbelief and condescension, asking in measured tones, "Do you really expect anyone to believe that?" And Jamal's gaze did not waver, his brown eyes steady and calm, holding the officer's attention, creating an unspoken stalemate that radiated through the surrounding students. The late morning sun painted long, stretching shadows across the asphalt, highlighting the contrast between the rigid lines of Parker's uniform and the soft folds of Jamal's hoodie, the natural light catching the subtle sheen on the metal badge and the faintly worn texture of Jamal's sneakers. A slight breeze stirred the leaves of the nearby trees, brushing across the court and carrying the faint, crisp scent of early autumn, the environment accentuating the stillness that had fallen over the scene, every rustle of clothing, every inhaled breath magnified by the collective attention of the onlookers. Jamal adjusted his stance slightly, feeling the rough texture of the asphalt underfoot, the subtle give of the painted lines beneath, the grounding elements reminding him of the lessons instilled by his father about calmness, focus, and measured confidence, a quiet strength that seemed to expand outward and subtly influence the energy of the crowd. Parker's expression shifted minutely, the corner of his mouth twitching as he tried to maintain his authoritative posture, his eyes scanning the students' faces for validation or support, yet finding the same fascination and tentative admiration mirrored in their gazes, a subtle acknowledgement that the dynamics of power had begun to shift. The ambient sounds of the school, the distant hum of the cafeteria ventilation, the faint squeak of shoes on concrete, the low murmur of distant conversations, interwove with the sharper, immediate details of the standoff, creating a rich sensory tapestry that emphasized both the setting and the psychological weight of the moment. Jamal's posture remained firm, shoulders square, chin slightly lifted, eyes unwavering, the quiet confidence in his stance a visible signal of his internal composure, of the patience and integrity he had cultivated, every micro-movement deliberate, controlled, and purposeful, radiating a calm authority that contrasted sharply with Parker's theatrical display of dominance. The sunlight glinted off the metal fence and nearby bleachers, casting intricate patterns of light and shadow across the court, highlighting the tension and the unspoken dialogue between Parker and Jamal, the contrast between youthful composure and imposed authority accentuated by the environment and the subtleties of body language. Jamal's attention was fully present, noting the smallest micro-expressions in Parker's face, the subtle shifts of weight, the flicker of surprise in the officer's eyes, sensing the moment when the performance of authority might meet its challenge. And through it all, the students remained captivated, the courtyard a silent witness to the unfolding demonstration of quiet strength, patience, and the poised defiance of a young individual standing firm in the face of unexpected scrutiny and skepticism. Jamal Thompson lowered his shoulders slightly, exhaling a measured breath as the sunlight shifted across the basketball court, the warmth of the late morning sun touching the edges of his hoodie while shadows from the surrounding bleachers stretched lazily across the asphalt, creating a pattern that seemed to pause time itself. The students who had been observing began to relax their stances, still curious, yet sensing the quiet authority in Jamal's composure. The way he held himself as if grounded in an invisible force that demanded attention without uttering a word. The faint rustle of leaves overhead harmonized with the distant hum of the cafeteria ventilation and the occasional squeak of shoes on concrete, creating a layered backdrop of ambient sound that accentuated the stillness and focus of the moment, each sensory detail reinforcing the tension between the observed and the observer. Jamal's eyes scanned the crowd briefly, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the small gestures of surprise or admiration, the slight widening of pupils, the way a few students leaned forward as if drawn closer by the gravity of the encounter, and then returned his attention to Officer Parker, whose smirk had begun to falter, replaced by a fleeting uncertainty that flickered across his features. The officer's polished badge caught a glint of sunlight, the metal reflecting in a way that contrasted with the muted textures of Jamal's worn sneakers and frayed hoodie, highlighting the visual dichotomy between established authority and quiet confidence. Jamal's hands remained lightly on the straps of his backpack, a grounding gesture, a rhythm of stability and measured patience, as he shifted his weight just enough to feel the texture of the painted asphalt beneath his feet, the subtle give and resistance reminding him of the firm control he held over his own presence. The air was filled with the faint aroma of autumn leaves mixed with the soft, earthy scent of the asphalt warmed by the sun, a sensory detail that seemed to anchor the unfolding scene in a tangible, cinematic reality. Students' murmurs softened, replaced by a near silence, the tension not dissipating but transforming into a quiet respect for the steadfast demeanor of the young teen who had become the center of attention. Every flicker of Parker's expression, every micro-movement of the officer's stance, from the subtle tightening of his jaw to the almost imperceptible tilt of his head, was registered by Jamal, a silent dialogue unfolding between authority and measured composure, each reading the other with an intensity that held the surrounding space in suspended anticipation. Jamal's breathing remained slow, deliberate, almost synchronized with the distant bounce of a basketball, the gentle sway of the chain-link fence, and the soft movements of leaves in the light breeze, creating a sensory rhythm that reinforced the sense of calm power he radiated. He allowed his gaze to soften, letting the awareness of the crowd and the court expand around him without distraction, feeling the energy of the students and the environment converge, and in that stillness, the court seemed to breathe with him, a living backdrop to the quiet demonstration of integrity and self-assurance, the kind that commanded attention, inspired subtle admiration, and set the stage for the next moment to unfold with clarity and cinematic resonance. The sound of an engine approaching from the street beyond the basketball court drew every eye, the distant rumble growing steadily louder, a low, controlled vibration that seemed to fill the space with anticipation, mingling with the soft rustle of leaves in the autumn breeze and the subtle hum of distant air conditioning units. Jamal Thompson's gaze remained steady, the faint warmth of sunlight brushing the edges of his hoodie, highlighting the subtle creases and worn textures, as he shifted his weight slightly to accommodate the rhythm of the approaching vehicle, the asphalt beneath his sneakers grounding him in the moment. Officer Parker's posture stiffened, the polished badge on his chest catching the light in sudden glints, the metallic shine reflecting his growing uncertainty, while his eyes flicked between the approaching car and Jamal, a mixture of incredulity and dawning realization etching across his features. The students surrounding the scene leaned forward, collectively holding their breath, the subtle movements of their feet against the asphalt and the soft whispers of anticipation creating an almost tangible tension that seemed to vibrate through the space. The vehicle slowed, pulling smoothly onto the edge of the court, its polished black exterior gleaming in the morning sun, the tires making a soft hiss against the asphalt as it came to a measured stop. The door opened, and Michael Thompson stepped out, his tall frame upright, clad in the unmistakable uniform of Delta Force, the sharp lines of the fabric catching the sunlight, and the insignia on his chest reflecting a steady, authoritative gleam. Every detail, the crisp collar, the polished boots, the subtle movement of his hands, spoke of precision, discipline, and the quiet power that had been silently present in the household lessons he had imparted to Jamal. Jamal's eyes met his father's, a brief, shared acknowledgement passing between them, a subtle nod, a quiet understanding of timing and presence, before Jamal turned slightly to give the space for the authority figure now fully realized to occupy the scene. Officer Parker's expression froze, the smirk fading completely, replaced by a mixture of disbelief and astonishment, the rigid lines of his stance now appearing unsteady under the weight of the new awareness, every muscle subtly responding to the sudden shift in perceived control as the students collectively leaned back, sensing the magnitude of what had just entered their shared space. The sunlight reflected off the uniform's edges and the polished insignia, the sharp contrast of light and shadow accentuating the commanding presence, while the breeze stirred faintly through the trees, brushing against the faces of onlookers, adding a soft, natural texture to the visual tableau. Jamal remained calm, shoulders square, chin slightly lifted, maintaining a composed stance, his hands resting lightly on his backpack straps as the court seemed to settle around the sudden arrival. Every sound, the distant bounce of a basketball, the whisper of wind through the leaves, the soft creak of the fence, amplifying the gravity of the moment. Parker's eyes flicked briefly between Jamal and Michael Thompson, a silent calculation passing through his mind, as the young teen's quiet confidence had now been validated by the physical presence of the father he had spoken of, the authority and discipline made tangible, undeniable, and commanding attention without a single word uttered. Every student present felt the shift, the energy on the court pivoting from tension and skepticism to a shared acknowledgement of the powerful dynamic now fully revealed, the morning sun casting long shadows that highlighted the drama and cinematic clarity of the scene, leaving Officer Parker momentarily suspended in a tableau of respect, realization, and unspoken recognition of integrity and quiet strength. Jamal Thompson stepped back slightly, feeling the faint warmth of the morning sun shift across the asphalt as the light reflected off the polished Delta Force insignia on his father's uniform. Every detail of the scene crystal clear in the quiet tension that lingered across the basketball court. Michael Thompson's presence radiated authority and calm, a subtle nod to discipline and integrity that contrasted sharply with Officer Parker's earlier arrogance, and the students gathered around could not help but sense the gravity of the moment, the quiet assertion of values and the demonstration of earned respect. Jamal's eyes met Parker's briefly, a steady, unflinching gaze that carried no malice but projected confidence and patience, a silent assertion that integrity did not depend on age or position, that respect was drawn from composure and character rather than force or intimidation. The breeze moved gently through the surrounding trees, rustling leaves and bringing the crisp scent of autumn air across the court, mingling with the faint warmth of asphalt and the subtle fragrance of school uniforms, a sensory backdrop that underscored the calm and deliberate rhythm of the unfolding scene. The students' attention remained focused, some leaning slightly forward, others with hands loosely at their sides, all absorbing the nuances of body language, microexpressions, and the silent dialogue between father and son and the officer who had been challenged. Jamal shifted his weight just enough to feel the grounding texture of the painted court beneath his sneakers, the tactile detail reinforcing his presence, his patience, and the measured approach that had guided him through the earlier moments of mockery and skepticism. Michael Thompson's gaze swept across the students, acknowledging their quiet observation without a word, a subtle demonstration of leadership and presence that complemented Jamal's poised stance, the combination of father and son projecting a unified display of integrity, patience, and silent authority. Parker's lips parted slightly, a hesitant movement, the smirk replaced by a careful, almost imperceptible acknowledgement, the contrast of expressions highlighting the reversal that had taken place, the quiet victory of patience and courage over initial assumptions and superficial judgments. Shadows from the bleachers and surrounding trees stretched and shifted with the sun, creating long, cinematic lines across the court that emphasized the stillness, the contrast of light and dark, and the tension that had now resolved into a calm understanding. Every sound, the distant bounce of a basketball, the soft murmur of whispers, the faint creak of the chain-link fence, was absorbed into the ambient tension, accentuating the narrative of composure, measured power, and moral clarity that had unfolded, leaving the court in a suspended moment of reflection. Jamal relaxed his grip slightly on the straps of his backpack, shoulders remaining square, chin lifted subtly, a small, almost imperceptible exhale of calm that seemed to ripple outward, signaling the resolution of the moment and the silent imparting of a lesson in courage, respect, and the quiet strength that comes from standing firm with integrity. Watched by classmates who had become witnesses to a demonstration of ethical authority that transcended words, creating a lasting impression of what measured confidence, patience, and moral clarity could achieve in the midst of doubt and challenge. Jamal Thompson adjusted the strap of his backpack one last time, the gray fabric brushing softly against his forearms as he took a step toward the edge of the basketball court, the sun now higher in the morning sky casting long, stretched shadows across the painted asphalt, creating a mosaic of light and dark that seemed to hold the weight of the entire sequence of moments that had just unfolded. The students who had gathered slowly began to disperse, their whispers fading into the background, the rhythm of distant sneakers on concrete and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze providing a gentle cadence to the quiet aftermath, a subtle soundtrack to the resolution of tension that had permeated the air. Michael Thompson's presence remained steady nearby, his polished boots grounding him in the sunlight, the insignia on his chest catching tiny glimmers of light, a silent testament to discipline and measured authority, while Jamal's eyes followed his father for a fleeting moment, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them, the unspoken bond of shared understanding and silent pride connecting them without the need for words. Officer Parker stood frozen, the weight of realization settling across his shoulders, the polished badge reflecting the morning sun in a way that accentuated his sudden stillness, the smirk and earlier display of superiority replaced by a subtle, almost imperceptible shift toward respect and understanding, his posture easing as he processed the events and the quiet authority that had prevailed. The breeze continued to move gently through the trees surrounding the court, carrying the crisp scent of autumn air mixed with the warmth of the sun-heated asphalt, a sensory landscape that framed the finality of the moment, the natural world echoing the calm that had replaced tension. Jamal exhaled softly, a deliberate, steady breath, letting the sensation of solid ground beneath his feet and the warmth of the sunlight reinforce his sense of composure and inner calm, shoulders remaining squared, chin slightly lifted, eyes scanning the dissipating crowd of students with a gentle awareness, acknowledging their presence and the subtle, quiet respect they now held without a word being spoken. The basketball court, once a stage of tension, now felt open and expansive, the shadows of the bleachers and nearby trees stretching gracefully across the painted lines, reflecting the balance between challenge and resolution, between authority and integrity. Every detail, from the slight shimmer of light on metal surfaces to the muted colors of students' clothing, woven into the still, reflective tableau of quiet triumph. Jamal allowed his gaze to sweep over the familiar elements of the court, noting the soft movements of classmates adjusting backpacks, the distant shuffle of shoes from those departing, and the gentle sway of leaves stirred by the wind, the ambient sounds harmonizing with the inner clarity and calm that he carried outward, a subtle, pervasive influence over the space. Michael Thompson nodded briefly, a quiet signal of acknowledgement and approval, the moment stretching in a suspended harmony as the students and Officer Parker absorbed the demonstration of composure, courage, and measured strength that required no words, no loud declarations, only the presence, poise, and integrity of a young man who had stood firm and a father whose silent authority reinforced that resolve. The sunlight continued to shift, tracing patterns across the asphalt, catching glints on metal surfaces and highlighting the texture of worn sneakers and fabric folds, casting a cinematic light over the court that emphasized the calm, reflective conclusion of the sequence, the final tableau of moral clarity, patience, and quiet recognition settling gently over the scene, leaving Jamal standing tall, composed, and unwavering as the ambient sounds of school life slowly reclaimed the space. The rhythm of the day resuming, yet carrying with it the subtle imprint of integrity and quiet strength that had been firmly established.